Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innovabuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome today to the Innovabuzz podcast from Boston in the USA, Brent Keltner, who's the founder and president of Winalytics. That's hard to say. Winalytics, a go-to-market consultancy helping B2B revenue teams build authentic buyer journeys that accelerate growth and create measurable, lasting value for their clients. So it's Winalytics. Welcome to the Innovabuzz podcast, Brent. Great to have you
Hey,
on the
Jürgen.
show.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I should have practiced saying the name of that business of yours. I know a lot of people stumble over Innovabiz, and now it's happened to me with another business. Anyway, before we dive in, quick note for our listeners, particularly if you're new to the show. It's always a candid conversation on the Innovabuzz podcast with remarkable people like Brent. We unpack the knowledge, the attitudes, and the values that drive real impact, dig into stories and strategies behind them, and try to pull out some ideas that you can act on today. We finish every episode with our signature buzz round, 3 rapid-fire questions that I ask of every guest. So it's a nice thread throughout all the episodes. Everything we cover will be in the show notes. So think of this as a seat at the table. You're with me, you're with Brent, and we're all learning together. Now, Brent, when we spoke on our last call, you mentioned almost in passing that you cook pepper and sausages in winter mornings before heading out to work in minus 10 degrees Boston weather. And you were telling me just before you're still having a lot of snow. I love that level of detail. It tells me a lot about who you are, disciplined, grounded, and someone who clearly doesn't do things by halves. Now, you've spent your career first as a researcher, then as a revenue leader, and now as a consultant and author, building a clearer and clearer picture about what that buyer and seller interaction really needs to create genuine value together. I'm really looking forward to following that thread today. So tell us a little bit more to begin with. What drives you in that mission and what impact you aim to make in the world today?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And before I have to just pick up on your half measures, because my kids growing up used to say, Dad is allergic to half-assed. That characterization, you're all in or not, for better or worse, is a good characterization. So thank you for remembering those details of our conversations. I've been an athlete my whole life, and the sport that I love the most, the sport that will be familiar to you, less so here, is rugby. There are 15 guys on the field, or 15 women. Women play rugby quite well. Rugby is the most team-oriented game I've ever played. You think of the team orchestration, great international play, as you'll know, but most Americans don't. It's about second, third, fourth, fifth phase scores, right? The whole team moving in unison, the forwards recovering the ball, throwing it off to the backs, do it again, do it again, do it again. I love that team flow. When you have a go-to-market team that's all working from the same buyer, ideal customers, buyers, messaging, how we engage and convert our customers, that's the feeling I get. You can kind of get into calls where hand off from an SDR to a salesperson, sales and CS working together, marketing crunching with their sales teams on what messaging's landing by persona. And you can just feel that alignment around. For us, it's all about how we help our buyers and our customers win quicker. And we put our egos at the door. It's about you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. And that also means that cross-functionally, I have to not think about my function, but I have to think about the journey. So for me, I have been excited about that mission since I started as a revenue leader 25 years ago, and keep figuring out ways to make it easier and easier for others to consume that mission. Journey first. Put your buyer's journey first. We all do better.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. I mean, I'm not a huge rugby fan. I don't understand the game, to be perfectly honest, but I do know enough about it to understand that metaphor of everybody's not just playing for themselves, they're playing on the team. And the unique thing about rugby is the ball usually has to be passed backwards, if I understand the rules correctly, and that creates an unusual dynamic in relation to a lot of other team ball sports, in that I think it requires you to have a pretty good idea as an individual of where your teammates are, because you're not necessarily seeing them. And I like that as a metaphor, because you did mention in the business part of the conversation about the cross-functional ideas, and one of the things that always fascinated me, a lot of these buyer persona documents that people put together, and even the very specific ones that I've seen that are, oh, wow, that's really very impressive. But they don't necessarily take into account that that buyer persona is one individual in a larger organization. And it may be the individual that is the contact person. It may even be the individual that has decision-making capability, but it's not going to be the sole decision maker, is it, in a bigger organization? So talk to us a little bit. How do you treat those buyer persona and the interactions and the strategy that it drives differently from that context, from the knowledge that, hey, this might be that person who's my contact in the other business, but they're not the sole decision maker?
Yeah, great question and great insight. We always say the buying committee used to be a sales concept, but now marketing needs to own the buying committee. Because to your point, I mean, and Gartner's told us this for years, there are 6 to 10 people involved in any deal, on average, a B2B deal. And the buyer journey is now 70 to 8%, 80% digital and content driven. So if marketing is not thinking about how is my website presented, so different people and different personas, the users, the people writing checks, the executive sponsor who has an initiative, the corporate buyers who are thinking about how does your technology, how does your work process relate to what else already exists. If we're not already messaging to those people, providing content to those people, then it's really hard for the champion to get the attention of all those folks. So we have to think about bringing together the buying committee from the very beginning of our positioning, our website, our content, as a way of building a kind of a multi-stakeholder journey. So personas matter 100%, but it's ultimately, as you said, how the personas relate to each other in a buying committee. That's how we convert sales, because accounts buy in B2B. Individuals do not buy. And so I think thinking about it that way, marketing now stepping back, and people have known a long time it's about content and digital, but do you have a digital experience, a buyer journey experience that actually connects your buying committee? And are your buying persona documents actionable for your SDRs and for your sales reps? Because I've reviewed, like you, a lot of beautiful buyer persona documents, and then you show them to an SDR and they're like, and how would I use that to connect with a buyer, the economic buyer in that organization? What do you want me to say to them? What are the right questions? Whatever is in your buyer persona document, they probably want 25% of it to have a really impactful email outreach or cold call outreach. And so build the buyer persona documents. Then you need some kind of enablement document, right? Just a primer, if you think about it, a front and back sheet that allows your frontline sales teams to bring them into action.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. That and I've always thought, okay, the way I've written the personas has always been focused on exactly what you said then about how do you bring that into action. But then looking at it from the point of view of where does that person sit in their own organization? And often I would ask the question of people I work with in terms of, well, what are their motivations within their organization? So, for example, the buyer in our potential customer organization, they might be the person that finally makes the decision and says, yes, we're going to buy your product or your service. But and obviously the value to the organization has to be demonstrated, but what's their individual motivation? They may be looking to save money for the organization and then come out of it looking like a hero within their organization. Or they may be wanting to introduce something in the organization that nobody's seen before. Wow, we can now do all kinds of fancy stuff that hasn't been possible before. Again, looking like a hero within their organization. So taking those things into account is all very important. I guess what I'm curious about, you mentioned, does the website, does all the email outreach speak to all the things along that buyer's journey? How do you kind of bring all that together?
Yeah, I mean, marketers have for a long time talked about, top, middle, bottom of the funnel content. And I think it's a good concept. What I would just say is that in a world, again, where buyers are consuming 8 to 12 content assets, they're spending a lot of time, 70-80% of the buyer journey, they say, is digital. A lot of buyers say they want a sales rep free sales experience. They usually regret it when they do, but increasingly a focus on self-education and content consumption. So marketing teams have to help sales teams meet much more educated buyers where they are and show up to that first call very well educated in themselves. So we just encourage marketing teams to think beyond conversion content on the website, case studies, ROI cases. What are the slides or the sell sheets that your team needs to use in a first and a second call, so they're messaging consistently, so that the content journey that marketing can create now, just create it from, that engagement content, the snippets, the social cards, testimonials, through your customer stories or your solutioning blogs, self-solutioning assets, through to your hero ebooks, etc. But also make sure that there is, just version it for how would your salespeople use it? How would they snap it into a slide deck? How would they have a follow-up email? So now you're helping your sales people to meet much more educated buyers, to be able to personalize around what each of those personas, what's the win? As you said, how do you make your champion a hero to person writing a check? How do you version, increasingly by segments? A lot of people that are sitting in financial services versus healthcare versus, manufacturing, they want to know just a little bit of versioning of language that speaks to their industry problems and challenges. And they'd much rather hear stories that are from their peers. They don't want to hear a hospital story if they're in manufacturing. They don't want to hear a banking story if they're in manufacturing. So thinking about building our content so you can arm your salespeople to speak to persona value, but then also how do you speak to segment value at the same time and do that quickly?
Yeah, I love the idea of the stories, and as you say, they're so much more powerful and convincing than me talking about me or my business to a potential client. If I talk about, here's what we've done for a business just like yours or a customer just like you, that's a much more powerful message. How do you, or one of the thoughts I had as you were describing that is this idea, and I think this is something that's often raised as an objection to, creating these buyer personas. So, well, if I get really specific about my buyer persona, I'm missing out on a big part of the market. And yet it's almost a paradox that if we're really clear about who do we serve and who don't we serve, that becomes kind of that that connection, isn't it? And so I'm wondering, is there a point where we say, okay, we have these case studies or testimonials from clients matching some ideal personas, but we don't post ones that maybe this is something we did as a one-off, but it's not our ideal client.
Yeah, I mean, two thoughts on that. There's just a phrase that we always say, which is um, broaden your appeal by narrowing your focus. Narrow your focus to broaden your appeal, right? I mean, so 100%, like the more clear you are on a smaller group of people, the better off you're going to do. But I think our recommendation is always exactly what your instinct is that on your website, you should put the verticals where you have critical mass. You know, you can list a half a dozen, 10 logos, and you have 3 or 4 really compelling stories with outcomes. You can outbound. I mean, then you can network, and out of events, you might meet with people that are outside of those ICPs. But the folks that we are proactively targeting in terms of outbounding or building content or giving really targeted website messages or digital ad placements, landing pages where we can draw people to those sites, we want to focus on it, as exactly you said, where we have the strongest social proof, the strongest customer stories. Not that we won't take other business, but the ones that we're going to proactively target and go after are those ones that we can line up and just name drop a bunch of really strong stories. I agree wholeheartedly with how you described that.
Yeah, and you said one thing there that I always remind people of as well, which is if business outside of those target verticals comes your way because they've discovered you somehow, there's no rule that says you can't take them on as a customer. It's entirely your choice in each individual situation. So it's not. I mean, I always laugh a little bit. I'll have to remember that broaden your horizon by narrowing your focus.
Narrow your
I think,
focus to broaden your appeal.
yeah. I'll have to remember
Narrow
that
your
one.
focus and actually broadens your appeal.
Yeah.
That's in that focus. I mean, your instinct on that is dead on.
Yeah, I always said it deepens the connections to the right people, but I like the broaden your appeal thing because it does draw from outside of that buyer persona audience often. And as I remind people, if when they're resisting, hey, I'm going to lock out some people, I say, no. If somebody comes outside that group, it's still your choice. Just because that's your buyer persona and this is who you're speaking to now, doesn't mean there's a rule that says you can't. You have to tell that person no. You can choose based on whatever criteria are in place right now.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Mm. All right. Well, one of the things you talk about a lot is this idea of authentic conversations. And I noticed in our conversation before that you're very deliberate about the use of that word. What do you think it means? Can you explain what it means to you to have authentic conversations, and what's a question we can all ask ourselves to say, are these conversations I'm having this week really authentic conversations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have shifted. We will talk more about a journey first approach or mindset because it just people kind of get that a little bit more. When I thought authentic conversation, that was the first book. Um, it's really that your buyer is engaging in something they care about, right? That's what makes it authentic. That is authentic for that person. And we always teach, whether it's in marketing or sales, you give people opportunities to either qualify themselves forward or out, right? It's the best use of both of our times is
Yeah.
we give you an opportunity to take the next step. If you don't, no harm, no foul. It's your same point on focusing on the ideal. We're just giving those opportunities. So we think of journey first as basically that, right, is my job is to help guide you down the journey, encourage you to take the next step, and you decide whether that's aligned to your authentic interests or not. So I think that's what it means to me is it's a more guided experience where you're really helping people uh, figure out what's best for them. There is a saying, I mean, my younger brother was an educator before he started his own business in the English education market. And there's a saying I love, which is in teaching, the old model was the sage on the stage who was lecturing. The new model is the guide by the side that is helping you learn in the ways that are most productive. And it's a great analogy for what marketing and sales teams should be. We should be the guide by the side that's helping people down their journey to make informed decisions about whether we're the right fit or not.
Mm.
You can't convince anybody of anything. I said once, I wrote a blog article once that in a LinkedIn post that just annoyed a lot of sales leaders. I was like, sellers don't close deals, buyers close deals.
Mm.
You can't bludgeon anybody into anything. You just got to ask them the right questions and make sure we're building buying readiness. So
Yeah,
that's to me
and
what authentic journey means, right? It's buyer driven, it's buyer guided, and we're a guide.
mm, yeah, I love that. I love and we've kind of haven't talked about the buyer's journey yet, but you've mentioned it several times, and I guess it's implicit that the next step from developing this persona of ideal buyers is to have that buyer's journey and have that understanding. And as you say, acting as a guide for the potential buyer alongside that journey. And that may be at some point saying, I don't think we're a good fit for one another anymore. So, your journey with us ends here and you're better off going out in this direction, is to me, that's what kind of signals to me that that person has my best interest at heart if they're on the other side of a potential sale and they're telling me, hey, I've given everything I've learned about you and your needs and your business needs. I don't believe this is the right fit right now. So that to me is kind of this authentic part.
That's right. And it could be it's not a fit, could be timing is off, right? And we'll just kind of gracefully exit that. And here's, I think, the marketing analogy, particularly as we get into more platforms that are tracking intent data or intent behavior or website traffic, and particularly as you can use AI and there are more AI agents tracking that. I think marketing teams don't do a good enough job of equipping sales with what we already know about how people are engaging with us, right? So somebody comes to your website, spends some time on your website. That's something that should be made available to sales to reach back. I see you downloaded XY uh, ebook. Here's another customer we solved a similar problem for. Are you interested in having a conversation about that? So we're already always building on the ways they are engaging with us. There's nothing more frustrating than spending a bunch of time on the website and you just get a cold invitation to a call,
Mm.
and people no attention to your past conversations or any other engagement, and they're saying they're not paying attention.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I think, you mentioned AI, and I guess I'm sort of really fascinated about this whole revolution we're going through right now. And one of the things that I think it's really good at is keeping track of these multiple touch points that as data, because all of it is data, the multiple touch points that a potential client is having with the website or with email marketing campaigns, other outreach that the company may be doing, and making that data available. How do you see um, how do you see that as a tool, and where do you see kind of the limitations where the human has to jump in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on a call earlier with a company that we may do some work with that has a platform for building AI agents, we have gotten pretty good at AI prompting. So you can write very personalized emails using a research agent who are your target accounts, and just AI will quickly go for every one of them, find what it is on their website, news feeds, etc., to connect your value prop to their specific initiative. Um, but if you then want to attach content to that, that's a different AI prompt. And so to actually personalize emails, that's a bit of work. Well, an agent can take that series of prompts and put it into, people call it orchestration, right? Put a series of touch points. And by the way, it can also pull in what I just talked about is, hey, what data do I have in HubSpot on anything they've engaged with, a website they've engaged with, content. And so now I have a AI agent that can build me a one workflow that is what's on their website in their or in their news feed, gives me something, that an observation, something they're working on, connected to my value prop, an insight on something they've already maybe engaged with me on, and then recommend a content asset. Put it into your email program, whether it's Gmail or Outlook. So we have gotten, and again, on the competitive positioning, we use AI all the time to do audits of differentiated words. What are your top 5 value defining phrases? And how does that compare to your competitors in terms of the strength of a positioning phrase, the consistency, the hierarchy on your website, third party sites? And then you can do a content audit. How on those kind of key phrases that are in the market, how good is your thought leadership? How is it, well, is it connected to your stories? I can do all kinds of things, but those are separate prompts. That's not in kind of one orchestrated review. So AI can do a lot. I do think the next wave is really taking processes that humans used to stitch together, and now AI agents getting you to a B in terms of how you build a personalized email. It's put right into somebody's outbox, associated content, human in the loop, still has to review that and hit send. But imagine in an hour, you get 25 of those hyper personalized emails with the right content asset, 10 minutes to read them and edit them, and boom, right? Now you've, what would have been 2 days of strategic account executives' time is now compressed into a very short period of time to be able to personalize. So I think that's the way AI is going to start to transform things. That it's in these agents that can get us to a B plus, and then a talented individual is going to up level that to an A minus or an A.
Yeah, it's certainly a really fascinating scenario. And I guess one of the other things, and I've always thought this is really good, and I have done it a little bit myself, but I haven't quite systemized it yet, which is instead of crafting the personalized emails, using it as a kind of create a briefing document for me, because I'm going to call this customer. I'm going to have a chat to this customer. It may be that I'm just touching base with them. I may not even want to sell them something on this call. It's just a relationship building call. I'm touching base at regular intervals, but give me all the information I have about this person. And that could include how they interacted with my website and those sort of things. So I think that's another really powerful way perhaps to use the AI for that. And then of course it's in the information's in my hands in very quick time. I haven't had to trawl through all my databases.
Yes. Yeah, I think it is. And I think this is the other thing we're seeing. We're not working on it, but I know folks are, where to your point, being able to build more full funnel KPI dashboards, because you can use AI to connect to, your HubSpot as well as your Salesforce, as well as your intent data platform or provider, to develop a more holistic view of audience engagement into leads, into, MQL to SQL conversion into closed won. And that's, I don't know that there'd be a lot of manual work to to draw on those different data sets to create a dashboard. But I know some people are doing some innovative stuff with that kind of AI dashboarding, drawing on multiple data sets.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. Um, I'm I'm curious because I know you've spent a lot of time as a qualitative researcher, and basically that's about sitting with people, listening deeply, identifying patterns, and figuring out what the patterns mean, what the patterns underlying people's behavior actually mean. I know you've earned a black belt in karate. I know you've um, built an entire methodology on the bias committee motivations that we've talked about a little bit and creating shared value. Uh, when you look at all these things together, do you think there's an underlying skill that runs through all of them that they have in common?
I wrote a post. It's probably the post that I've received more engagement. A couple hundred people engaged with it on my karate journey. And I'll get you the punchline of your to answer your question. But I basically said I was terrible at karate when I started. I was a rugby player, I was a wrestler, I was a marathoner, I was a drive through it kind of guy. And karate is a finesse sport.
Mm.
It's minimum input for maximum output, right? And I didn't have the right mindset and I have terrible balance. I couldn't dance to save my life. And karate is all about the smoothness of your rhythm and timing. But I don't know what intrigued me about karate. Probably that you could get belts. I love doing it with my kids. Um, for some reason, I committed to it. And what I committed to was taking every opportunity to learn from others. My son, very natural. I did it with my son and daughter, very natural. Learned all the time from my son. The women in the class, awesome at kata. Learned from them on kata. I didn't care who it was. I was an equal opportunity learner. I checked my ego at the door every time I walked in to that dojo. So I think the answer to your question is for me, that low ego learner mindset, it's not about my way, it's about the best outcome in the situation, has served me well in being able to excel in a variety of different areas.
Mm. Yeah, I love that low ego learner. I haven't heard it described like that before, but I always remind myself. I think it was Albert Einstein who said, "The more I learn, the more I know. The more I was it, the more I read, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I realize, the less I know," or something along that. Probably misquoting him, but it's the gist of it is along those lines, and I think that kind of speaks to that ego thing. It's got to
Well,
remember.
I think the other part of it is into your, I think the qualitative research training had an impact there is, if you're doing qualitative research, you don't have a big data set to work from. So you need to figure out how to, get the most value out of every situation. And in this post, I think most of us are very hierarchical learners. Oh, that person I'm learning from, what's their degree? Who else is paying attention to them? And my orientation is I didn't care who was in the environment. What could I take out of that environment? So if we look for opportunities to learn, the opportunities are usually abundant,
Yeah.
from kids, from low social status people, from, or whatever it is, our elders, from people different walks of life. There is always an opportunity to learn if you look for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I was just going to say that sometimes that hierarchical learning model locks us out of opportunities to see, because that typically the hierarchical learning model will go from this is the way we've always done it, and if somebody comes along unencumbered by that knowledge, they might say, well, I'm going to do it this way because that's how my mind works, or whatever the motivation might be, and all of a sudden, oh, that's a different opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Excellent. Well, it's fascinating, Brent. We could sort of dig into a lot of these areas, the learning styles, and that is another whole topic, I think, to focus on. But I'm just aware of the time right now, and I think it's a good point to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. Same 3 questions I ask of every guest, and it is focused on innovation and AI. So hopefully you'll inspire the listener to do something awesome today as a result. All set?
All set.
Okay, so on the subject of innovation, what's the most innovative way you've seen AI used that actually strengthens human relationships?
Honestly, I think just anybody, whether you're writing a sequence or code or writing a blog, I think the process of teaching I how to understand your perspective can improve relationships. I mean, just because it won't get it at first, but just taking the time to explain and re-explain and narrow in, I found it very helpful in terms of I tend to communicate very quickly and just assume people understand what I'm saying.
Mm,
And having to slow down and say, nope, thanks for that. You got that right, but you didn't get this right. So I found that interactive process of really kind of, it's like a little bit of a dance you're doing with AI to get it to the right point because it doesn't have emotions, but it also doesn't read any other cues, right? So it can't kind
yeah.
of pick up or have any social niceties. So to me, I was like, that could be a way to improve human communication.
Mm. Yeah, that's certainly something that I've found, and I've started every now and then. When I think of it, I should be more disciplined. Probably, the if the AI is hallucinating over what I've given it, or if it's giving me total rubbish, I will do as you've described. I'll sort of go back and forth and make sure I haven't assumed something that isn't inherent in the original questions, and then ultimately, when I do get the information I require, I've found that to go back and say, what should I have asked initially to get this outcome, is actually helped me a lot to say, oh, okay, that would have been a much clearer way of communicating my question or my um, instructions. Mm,
Yeah. So I think it's, using AI to commit to the back and forth.
mm.
Maybe is the short way I'd say that.
Yeah,
Because that
yeah,
is human, right? It's back and forth. It's give and
exactly. Yeah,
take.
yeah. Yeah, and usually, if I ask you to do something, um, you're, yeah, a lot of the times you might come back and say, "Can I just clarify something?" or I didn't quite understand this bit, or how do you expect me to do that? When I haven't given you enough information, so you basically would engage in a conversation to clarify those things that I've assumed you will know, and incorrectly assumed.
Yes.
All right. Well, based on your own experience, what's the best thing you've done to integrate AI in a way that actually builds or enhances those human connections?
Builds or enhances human connections. I will say this. I for important emails, I always run them through AI for clarity and shortness and brevity
Yeah.
so that I can get my point across and I sometimes overwrite. I can get my way across in the way that is the easiest for the user.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
AI,
excellent.
I
I
think is
love that. And
quite helpful
yeah, yeah.
in
I,
sharpening and shortening language.
Yeah, yeah, I probably suffer from the same thing, and I find I do that also in personal notes that I write. And what I've started doing now, I've got an app that I can record onto, so I'll just record the random speaking, which saves me a lot of typing stuff. Because when I'm typing, I tend to start to think, well, let's put that in a proper sentence. Whereas if I'm recording it, I'll just say bullet point or half baked sentence or jump back to the beginning or whatever, and then use an AI model to actually then write that up as a proper coherent email or set of notes. Excellent. All right. What's the number one thing you think we need to all be developing as a skill in particular to stand out as people, as someone who adds value as a human in this age of AI today?
One of the things I work on with all teams is recapping and road mapping, right? Just as it's our job often is to connect the conversation, right? This is how we got here today. This is what we'll focus on today. This is what we'll do next. Um, People just appreciate that. It builds trust. I find with AI, if you can give it that context, this is where I'm trying to go in the output, and then you can kind of frame the inputs, you get a much better uh, output out of AI. High quality inputs, or I'm kind of framing the conversation for you. I'm giving you a sense of what a good output looks like, what comes next, that it does a lot better than without that framing of these are the three inputs I'm going to give you, and this is the output that I would like to get. So I think just in a world where people are busy and overwhelmed, which we all are, because I have like 6 different applications that people text me on, right? Between the international applications and the group meets and everybody is like distracted all the time, just always bringing people back to, why are we talking today? What is it we're working on? What would a good outcome be? What would we do next? And I think AI works the same, right? The more we roadmap where we're trying to go and the inputs to getting there, the better it does.
Yeah, I love the framework, and as you say, it's the skill in order to get the best out of, let's say, a meeting that we have today is pretty much similar to how to frame a conversation with an AI. Love it. So it's good practice to just do that with the AI. You can't make a fool of yourself.
Both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, I did have a close friend who works in the more OD organizational design world, and he was the first one that said to me 6 months ago, we should think about AI as a teammate. And I think it's a good insight, like the give and take, the framing and the road mapping. AI is different, but I think it's the way we work with humans and then this kind of quasi-organic brain. I think it is a good skill, and like getting it right with AI is more important if you don't want garbage back.
Yeah.
So I think
right.
you're onto something with the parallels.
Yeah. I wrote an article a little while back about treating AI as a naive intern, and I talked about how to mentor somebody who's got incredible knowledge but no real world experience, and how do you work with that person and treat the AI like that.
All right, I think that's another good analogy.
Well, thanks a lot for the conversation, Brent. It's been really fabulous. Where can people find out more about you, about Winalytics, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared with us today?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest is just if you can find me on LinkedIn under Brent Keltner. There are no others that I'm aware of. Or you can just email me at bkeltner@Winalytics, WINALYTICS.com. And I answer anybody who emails me, I will answer you.
Excellent. All right. And we'll put those links in the show notes so it makes it really clear where to go. Finally, Brent, as we wrap things up, what's a specific action you think our listener could take away from our conversation today?
Not about you. It's about your buyer.
Yeah, keep that in mind.
And really start to live that in everything you do. That's a specific action. We are all creatures of you know, we're wired to be selfish and self-centered, and right? It's a Hobbesian world, and many of us strive to move beyond that. But I think the more you build that as a habit, the better it works out for everybody.
Mm, excellent. And yes, it's we can talk about leaving ego at the door, and we can talk about being servant leadership and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, we all want to feel cared for, and so if as salespeople or marketing people, we can make our buyer feel like we care for them, it's got to come back to service as well.
Yeah. We sometimes, when we work with sales teams and you do call recordings and you kind of look at talk times, and it's often at the beginning very much in favor of the seller. And we just say, what's the number one thing people want to talk about? Everybody raises their hand and says themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you talk 80% of the time? To your point, if we just make it about our buyer, let them tell us what they're interested in, what they're working on, everybody does better.
Mm. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much, Brent, for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I've learnt quite a bit, a couple of great metaphors that are new to me and that I'll bear in mind and probably use one or two of in the future. All the best for the future, and please do stay in touch.
Yeah, Jurgen, thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.